The Christmas Ladder by Louise Twitchell. The Reverend was tired. It was the sort of unhappy tired that ought never be felt around the holidays, especially not this most sacred of holidays. Christmas, the day dedicated to remembering when the Christ child graced the earth with his presence. It was the day before Christmas Eve in Danville, Quebec, where he lived with his wife and 3 little daughters. Zilpha would probably have a hot pot of coffee on the stove, and he savored the thought of the hot drink as he trudged through the newly fallen snow. He pushed open the kitchen door and stomped the powder snow off his worn boots, sighing softly as the girls came running to greet him. Louise, the oldest, Miriam, and Kathleen. Sweet little Kathleen struggled to keep up with the older girls, tottering around on her little legs. He took off his coat, shaking the snow off, and hung it on a peg by the door before scooping Kathleen up in his arms. She giggled happily. "Papa!" "Hello, Kathleen." He ruffled her hair, smiling down at Louise. "Were you good girls today?" Miriam nodded eagerly, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "We made cookies with Mama, Papa. We made cookies to hang on the tree." Merton's heart sank to the bottom of his proverbial boots, and then a bit past that into the cellar. He wished he didn't have to explain to the precious trio that he simply didn't have the money to purchase a tree. Given the surrounding fields and farmland, it wasn't as if he could just go out and cut a tree. There simply weren't any to be had, save buying one. There would be no tree in the Snow house for Christmas this year. He might have been a coward, he considered briefly, in not telling them right away. He just couldn't bear the thought of their disappointed faces, so instead he nodded pleasantly. "That's very good, Miriam. Cookies to hang on the tree." "And Mama and I made popcorn and cranberry strings to wrap all around it," Louise exclaimed, holding her arms wide and spinning in a circle to demonstrate. Merton chuckled and set Kathleen down on the floor. He kicked off the boots and set them in front of the fire to dry, and Louise brought him a cup. He filled it with coffee from the pot and sank onto the bench in front of the fire to dry his damp woolen socks. Zilpha appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later, bringing a musty scent and a dust rag with her. She smiled at Merton, her eyes bright. "Hello, dear. Is the weather very bad outside?" "Oh, bad enough, he nodded, sipping his coffee. "Getting worse, I think. It'll be all white outside tomorrow, for sure." "Well, I've cleaned the parlor, all spick and span. All is ready." He nodded, forcing a smile onto his face, and gulped down the coffee, wishing it wasn't quite so hot. It scalded his throat as he swallowed it down. Then he got up and went to the cellar door. "Merton, where are you going?" "Just down cellar for a bit. Call me when supper's ready." She sighed softly and nodded, watching him go. He trudged down the stairs and stood, looking around. There wasn't much there. Some foodstuffs, a handful of packing crates left over from the move to Danville, and a half a dozen cans of paint on the shelf. The smallest glimmer of an idea growing in the back of his mind, he went over and pried the lid off each can. White, red, brown, tan, cream, green. He grabbed a stick and stirred the paint, blending it smooth again. Maybe it was a little old, but it was the right color, a rich evergreen. His hand slowed, stirring idly, as he stared at a dusty cobweb in the corner of the cellar. He had paint, in the right color. But what would he paint with it? A spider crept out of a crack in the wall and began repairing the web. Knowing how much Zilpha disliked the loathsome creatures, he looked around, grabbed a dust rag, and crossed the cellar. He reached up to brush it away, but he couldn't quite reach. "Where is that stepladder?" he murmured to himself, searching around again, and then froze. The stepladder. He hunted around the cellar and couldn't find it, so he hurried up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. "Zilpha!" he called, and she jumped, splashing the stew out of the spoon she was holding. "Yes?" "Where's the stepladder?" he asked, and at the urgency in his voice, her face filled with worry. "It's in the parlor still. I haven't taken it back down cellar yet. Whatever is the matter?" He shook his head and hurried to the parlor, grabbing the stepladder, and then back down to the cellar. Louise started to follow him. "No, Lou, not right now. Papa's busy." He smiled, but closed the door before heading down the stairs again. He set the ladder up in the middle of the floor, rummaged around until he found a paintbrush, and grabbed the can of paint. Smooth, long strokes up and down the wood. The wood was slowly transformed under his hands. There would be something, he vowed. There would be something for the girls to decorate. There would be. One coat wasn't enough. The wood still showed through in places. He looked worriedly at the paint left in the bottom of the can, hoping there would be enough for a second coat. "Merton, supper's ready," Zilpha called, and then sneezed. "Goodness, what are you doing down there? The paint fumes are so strong." He hadn't noticed them until she mentioned it, and then he grimaced. "I'll be right there." He grabbed a pail and filled it with snow from the outside. He stuck his paintbrush in it to keep it from drying out and then scrubbed his hands with a turpentine rag, scrubbing away the traces of paint that inevitably lingered whenever one painted. He hurried upstairs and sat down at the table, gave the shortest blessing over the meal that he could remember ever giving, and ate quickly. Zilpha's worried looks were not lost on him, but he wanted to surprise her as well as the girls. He ate and then hurried right back to the cellar. The first coat of paint was almost dry. He picked up the brush and squeezed the snow off it before dipping it into the paint and beginning. Stroke after stroke, the soft swish of the brush soothing and calming him. He liked painting. He enjoyed the feeling of transforming something plain into something extraordinary, and as he painted, his mind began spinning a sermon for the following Sunday. The job was finished, finally, to his exact standards. He looked down at the can of paint and hid a smirk of satisfaction as he used the brush to clean the last bit from the edge and triumphantly swipe it right across the front of the ladder. He cleaned up, noting the jug of turpentine was running low. He didn't want to give his secret away. If only Zilpha didn't need anything from the cellar before the next morning, all would be safe. He looked back at his tree with pleasure. Not quite a tree, but better than nothing. Something they could hang their cookies and berries strings on. He turned out the light and went up the stairs, his heart rising from its place in his boots and settling back into his chest. He stifled a yawn as he went to the fireplace and warmed his hands, then to the parlor where Zilpha was already reading to the girls. He sat down beside her and she silently passed the Bible over, relaxing when she saw he was no longer so agitated. After the nightly reading, he kissed the girls goodnight and settled down to work on the sermon he had thought of while painting. Zilpha took the girls and tucked them in bed, and then returned to the parlor to sit beside him in a quiet silence while she crocheted little presents for the girls. The next morning after breakfast, the girls clamored excitedly. Well, Louise and Miriam did. Kathleen didn't really remember what a Christmas tree was, and she just bounced around with her sisters, yelling happily and clapping her hands. Zilpha took the basket of cookies and popcorn and cranberry strings into the parlor and brought out a few precious glass ornaments that had belonged to her mother. Merton went down cellar and brought back the ladder, carrying it into the parlor with all the triumph that belonged to a man who had gone woods hunting for a tree. "Our tree is going to be the only one like it this year," he announced, setting it up, and Zilpha giggled. He got a box of tacks and a hammer and began tapping them into the wooden rungs, leaving a good bit exposed so as to have a hook to hang the ornaments on. Louise grabbed Miriam and Kathleen's hands and began dancing around the tree, singing carols at the top of her lungs. Merton watched them, his eyes twinkling, as Zilpha tried to coax them back to earth long enough to hang the cookies on the tree. The Reverend was tired, the comfortable sort of tired that warmed one from the tip of one's nose to the tips of one's toes. He drew near his family and began singing with them as he held Kathleen up to place the painted paper star on the top of the ladder.